Good morning and welcome. My name is Prit Patel, and I'm the manager of the North Central Texas Economic Development District, which functions under the North Central Texas Council of Governments. And we're just so excited to host staff from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is referred to as NIST, here today to make a presentation on their agency's funding opportunities. And that's important to us because, the Economic Development District, we can certainly provide technical assistance and guidance on EDA, Economic Development Administration grants. We certainly don't have the level of knowledge nor expertise to speak to the NIST grant. So we're just grateful for NIST to be being available to our region here today and for making this presentation. As you all know, the semiconductor chips industry is a major industry and a growing industry in the North Texas region. And so our hope is that these NIST funding opportunities will provide an opportunity to grow that industry further and to ensure some jobs of the future. So grateful for you all being here today. So let's get started. A few things, please use the chat feature for any questions you have, and then the NIST staff will address those questions at the end of their presentation. And again, we thank you for blocking off 90 minutes on this Monday morning and being available and being here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to NIST staff to introduce themselves and to start the presentation. So thank you all so much.
Hi, Prit. Thank you for that introduction and for hosting us here today. My name is Ayodele Okewo. I'm Director of Intergovernmental Affairs at the CHIPS Program Office, which, as Prit mentioned, is part of the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. The CHIPS Program Office was stood up about a year ago, actually, shortly after the enactment of the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act. So as most of you know, the Chips and Science Act was passed through the House and Senate on Capitol Hill last summer and was signed into law in August by President Joe Biden. And there are three major policy reasons for the Chips for America Fund. The first one is economic security. Second one is national security, and third is future innovation. And so as we walk through this presentation, you'll see that all of our efforts, all of our evaluation criteria, all of our ambitions with this program are tied to those three pillars. Again, economic security, national security, and future innovation, and continued and strengthened leadership when it comes to research and development. So with that, we can jump into the actual slide deck. Prit, are you going to be sharing that from your end?
I can certainly do that. Let me pull it up really quick.
Okay. All right, and I can continue talking while we get that pulled up. And so, going back to those policy factors that brought us to the point where we could pass a $280 billion Chips and Science Act with $52 billion authorized and appropriated for administering through the CHIPS Program Office, is because we all now know, especially after the pandemic, that we needed to establish chips production here at home to protect our economic and national security against disruptions out of our control. One of those major disruptions was over the last 3 years with regards to the pandemic. And we know that, if centers of production for these critical chips, which are honestly the DNA of our modern world, are not here domestically or with our allies, we are always at risk of further global supply chain choke points and disruptions, which again negatively impact our economic security and our national security. And so we have to increase our wafer production here in the United States. We have to develop the technical expertise, the capabilities, and importantly, the workforce that's going to ensure United States leadership in semiconductors for many years to come. And so in addition to reshoring production, as previously mentioned, we also are making an investment in developing an R&D ecosystem here in the United States. And so the manufacturing incentive sides and the R&D side are going to inform each other with outputs from the R&D side benefiting U.S. semiconductor manufacturing. And so this is the type of program and implementation that is going to self-perpetuate, and it's going to facilitate and increase the ability for continued ecosystem development and growth, not unlike what you're seeing in North Central Texas and Texas, generally speaking, with regards to the semiconductor ecosystem. And so we can go to the next slide. I mentioned the two major pieces. There's $39 billion for incentives, which our CHIPS program office is responsible for administering. But we work very closely with the CHIPS R&D office, which is quickly staffing up and is going to be responsible for administering the $11 billion for continued innovation and R&D leadership. And we'll dive into exactly what that's going to entail as far as the main components of that $11 billion. And then outside of the CHIPS program office and the CHIPS R&D office, there are other CHIPS initiatives with sister agencies such as the Department of Defense, Department of State, National Science Foundation, which has done a lot of work prior to the signing of this bill into law with regards to public-private consortia and workforce initiatives and things of that nature. And then the Department of Treasury, which is responsible for administering the critical investment tax credit as well. We can go to the next slide. All right, and so let's dive into CHIPS incentives a little more. This is just kind of a high-level timeline. So as you can see, February 28th, 2023, most of you are familiar with this. The CHIPS program office released our first notice of funding opportunity. This was about 6 months after the enactment of the law, as our secretary, Gina Raimondo, had pushed our team to do. So we're very happy to meet that deadline. So that first funding opportunity was for commercial leading edge current and mature node fabrication facilities. And also it allowed eligibility for investments in advanced packaging facilities. That's a critical piece of this as well. A little bit more recently, at the end of June, we released an amendment to that first notice of funding opportunity to allow large semiconductor materials and equipment facility projects above $300 million, at $300 million and above, to also qualify for the first funding opportunity. A lot of our work from day one, and honestly, I joined the CHIPS program office at the end of August last year. There were many people here at the department who were working to get this legislation passed, to plan what administration of this law would look like far before me. And one thing they've been really, really good at, and everyone here has been really, really good at, is not just using what we know to inform our program design. We are constantly reaching out to external stakeholders, constantly reaching out to industry, constantly reaching out to academia, to workforce representatives, to labor, to customers and end users, to ensure that we have the full expertise to build a program that's going to be successful. And during that iterative process, we realized after releasing the first notice of funding opportunity that certain large supplier projects for equipment manufacturers, for material suppliers, were more in the mold of some of the large leading edge current and mature node fab projects that were already eligible. So we wanted to ensure that we used our capacity and our bandwidth to allow for those kind of applications as well. But as you can see on the timeline, moving forward, in the next several months, we are planning for a more streamlined, smaller notice of funding opportunity for smaller semiconductor materials and equipment facility projects under that $300 million threshold. And so this is going to be a more streamlined notice of funding opportunity. It's going to be less burdensome. We've heard from industry and other key stakeholders, and so we've taken that into account and want to make sure that the opportunity that we put out a little bit later on does provide access for those critical supply chain projects. And then also later on, we're planning a separate R&D facility, notice of funding opportunity. This is going to be separate from our $11 billion R&D program. It's going to be part of the $39 billion manufacturing incentives program. And this is going to have eligibility for the construction of semiconductor R&D facilities. So tying those critical R&D facilities that are necessary for streamlined commercial projects. We can go to the next slide. And so, going back to February 28th, our secretary, Raimondo, gave a speech where she outlined our vision for success. And she highlighted, 4 main criteria when it came to that vision of success. And so I want to just spend a minute or two touching on that. And so as you can see here, there are 4 main pieces: leading edge logic, memory, advanced packaging, and current generation and mature. And so most of you are familiar with all of these pieces, but I do want to expand on them a little bit, because everything that we do, like I said, is tied to the main goals of the program. And we also use this vision of success as sort of a North Star when determining if the work we're doing, if the proposals we're evaluating do take us closer to those goals of economic security, national security, and continued innovation leadership. And so I'll start with leading edge logic. By the end of the decade, the United States will have at least 2 new large scale clusters of leading edge logic fabs. So the leading edge chips, which are critical for your smartphone, for consumer electronics, for critical defense systems, we want at least 2 new large scale clusters for the production of these chips around the country. And so, where clusters are geographically bounded areas with multiple commercial scale fabs, a large and skilled workforce, nearby suppliers, the R&D facilities that we mentioned, utilities, and specialized infrastructure, which creates, again, that self-perpetuating ecosystem that continues to evolve, develop, and grow way beyond the initial federal government investment of CHIPS funding. And so, each CHIPS funded cluster will have the scale, infrastructure, and other competitive advantage required to ensure that, chip makers view this cluster as a great investment for future and continued expansion. And furthermore, U.S.-based engineers will need to develop the process technologies underlying the next generation of logic chips. And so each CHIPS funded cluster will be supported by an ecosystem of critical onshore suppliers, and the United States defense and intelligence communities will have access to secure leading edge logic chip production here in the United States. And then advanced packaging is super important. As the chips get smaller, as we fight to keep up with Moore's law, we need to continue to innovate. And advanced packaging is a critical emerging innovation when it comes to keeping up with the efficiency growth of Moore's law. And so, in addition, as part of our vision of success, the U.S. will be a global leader in commercial scale advanced packaging technology for both logic and memory chips. And packaging for chips produced by CHIPS funded fabs will be provided by U.S.-based facilities or other facilities outside of countries of concern. And so advanced packaging is very important too. And then for memory, by the end of the decade, we need to produce high volume memory chips on economically competitive terms. And so in addition, R&D for next generation memory technology is critical to supercomputing and other advanced computing applications will be conducted right here in the United States. And then, current generation and mature, sometimes there's a little bit of over focus on the leading edge piece, just because, our phones are in our hand and we know what exactly that leading edge chip can produce. But, sometimes we forget that, and I'm sure folks in Texas don't forget, but sometimes we forget that, these current and mature generation chips are integral to the automotive industry, to the aerospace industry. When we ran into some of those global supply chain disruptions during the pandemic, a lot of that came down to the lack of access to the current generation of mature chips that were critical for our automobiles. And so, chips would reach the end of that factory line, and they would be out in the lot, almost ready to go to a dealer, but they were missing that chip. And so we knew at a visceral level, the level of disruption that caused. And so we want to ensure that when it comes to the current generation of mature chips, that we are not taking our eye off that ball as well. And so the United States will have strategically increased its production capacity for current generation of mature chips, and the US will increase production of and maintain technology leadership in compound semiconductors and other emerging technologies based on current generation and mature process nodes. And it's also important, again, we can't just do this by ourselves. So our allies and our partners will also increase their production of current generation of mature chips, and chip makers will also be able to respond more nimbly to supply and demand shocks. And so those are the four main pieces of our vision of success. And like I said, this is our North Star. It helps us stay focused on reaching our overall goals of economic security, national security, and continued innovation leadership. We can go to the next slide. I want to spend just a quick minute. I think we skipped a slide. If we can go back to, great, thank you. Just really quickly, I want to touch on the vision of success specific to the materials and equipment facilities NOFO amendment that we put out a couple months ago. And so I won't spend too long on here. I'm sure we'll be able to send out this PowerPoint deck afterwards, but I just want to highlight the three areas: strengthening supply chain resilience, advancing U.S. technology leadership, and supporting vibrant U.S. fab clusters. So again, you know, the idea behind this amendment was that a lot of these projects are in the mold of some of the large scale, leading edge and current generation of mature projects that we've seen. And so we wanted to ensure that we were responsive to that input and feedback. But again, you have an opportunity to read this slide once we send this information out to you. All right, we can go ahead to the next slide now. So let's talk briefly about the funding instruments. So as you can see, there are three tools in our toolkit. There's direct funding, which is the $38.2 billion. There are loan guarantees and loans with leverage up to $75 billion. And so I think that's important for everyone to be familiar with. I think, you know, we have probably 100% socialization when it comes to everyone understanding that industry, if they're eligible, can have access to that direct funding. But we also have a lot of leverage when it comes to loan guarantees and the loans themselves. And so the loans, which are direct loans from the federal government to the applicant for eligible costs, similar to you know, what you'd experience in the private financial sector, but also loan guarantees, which are federal guarantees of third-party loans in the private sector to the applicant for eligible costs. And so all of these are the tools in our toolkit that we can leverage to provide investment to incent these critical semiconductor proposals on the ground. Also, you know, I mentioned the ITC, the investment tax credit that is being administered by our friends at the Department of Treasury. That is also a key tool. You know, projects can qualify for up to 25% of their real property costs for facilities that are eligible and do meet the criteria as far as you know, producing semiconductors, meeting key supply chain inputs. And so there's our friends at Treasury have put out a lot of information there. We also encourage you to definitely check that out. And we have information for that on our website at chips.gov as well. And that's not to mention, you know, private investments, state or local incentives, which are required in the statute. This all creates sort of that layer cake to meet that total capital cost to ensure that these projects that we're investing in have the financial strength and, you know, the commercial ability and the technical feasibility to be successful in the long term. And so I do want to note, direct funding from the federal government, from the CHIPS office, is going to be between that 5 and 15% threshold of project capital expenditures. And so as you have conversations with industry, and folks are interested in applying, I do want them to be aware of the level of investment that the federal government plans to execute with respect to different projects. All right, and then the last thing I'll say, and you see it at the bottom right of the slide too, so the expected total amount of a CHIPS incentive award is expected not to exceed about 35% of project capital expenditures. And so again, 35%, you add on state or local incentives, you add on potential utilization of the investment tax credit, you add on potential private investments, not to mention the investments that the applicant company is making as well, and that's how you get to that total capital cost for these projects. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right. So just really quickly, and again, this will be more information that you can definitely read as we send out these slides, but also we have a vision of success paper at chips.gov for materials and equipment suppliers, as well as the amendment itself. So we encourage you all to read these documents. But to achieve our vision of success for materials and equipment suppliers, we are establishing 2 pathways to apply for CHIPS funding for material and equipment suppliers. And so, like I said, we opened our first funding opportunity for the large commercial projects. And so this amendment was for the materials and equipment facility projects with investments at 300 million or above. And you all can check out more information about that. And to reiterate, we're going to have a streamlined notice of funding opportunity later in the year for smaller suppliers with projects below that $300 million threshold. All right, next slide. So this is a key slide. As you can see, there are 6 program priorities that we are using to evaluate every single proposal that comes before us. And so hopefully you've identified a little bit of a trend as we go through this presentation. So we started with the three main goals for the program. So national security, economic security, future innovation and leadership. The way we get to those goals are through our vision of success. And we've had a vision of success for every major rollout out of the CHIPS program office. We typically like to have that, roadmap, that strategy that we explain for every major announcement. And so you saw how our vision of success is the roadmap for those 3 main objectives. And so these are the actual criteria when it comes to applications. And so, try to keep that through line, that trend, front of mind when thinking about your interactions with industry, other key stakeholders, and potential proposals. And so economic and national security objectives, again, are key. Commercial viability, which I touched on a little bit earlier, financial strength, technical feasibility and readiness, workforce development, and then broader impacts. And so we'll jump into each of these, I think one by one in the slides. So we can go ahead and skip to the next slide for economic security, and we'll start there and then dive into these individual pillars one by one. All right. And so economic security, I think, that's pretty straightforward, but I want to just expand on it a little bit. And so, to the extent to which an application addresses the program's economic and national security objectives is of primary importance and receives the greatest weight in evaluation. I think I've already mentioned, economic and national security 3, 4, 5 times already during this presentation. So you can tell it really is top of mind for us. Every decision that we make, every conversation, every evaluation that we do, again, brings us back to that question of economic security and national security. And so Chips for America is seeking to invest in projects that meaningfully increase U.S. semiconductor production and strengthen U.S. supply chains, with a particular emphasis on projects that will mitigate risks from supply chain shocks associated with the geographic concentration of current semiconductor production. And so that's really what it comes down to. we'll send this so you can read more at your leisure. And again, we also have more information speaking to this critical pillar on our website. Moving to the next slide, national security. Semiconductors, they're vital to our national security. Government organizations and contractors that fulfill national security missions require stable, long-term onshore access to semiconductors. So we are committed to supporting projects that meet government agencies' need for access to safe, secure, and domestically produced chips. So moreover, we seek projects with the ability to adapt commercial production, testing, and packaging models for low-volume national security components, or otherwise apply commercial technologies to meet specific national security and whole of government objectives. And the risk of malicious disruptions to semiconductors and the supply chains has risen in concert with increased chip complexity, process separation, and outsourcing. So that's something that we need to be aware of and that we take into account when reviewing these proposals. Moving along, commercial viability. And so this priority addresses a project's long-term commercial viability to ensure there is a reasonable market environment and demand for the project's output. And so things we consider, robust demand for proposed project output. So, what is actually being produced out of the project or the facility or the fab, the size and diversity of the customer base, projected, existing, and planned future supply, and how this project impacts the overall supply demand dynamic for the project output, expected volume and pricing dynamics for the output, technology, obsolescence risk. So, how long is this facility or this project site going to be useful? If it takes, 2 years for a project to come online or for a fab to come online, but the equipment is outdated soon after, that's not a long-term sustainable investment from our perspective. And so we want to make sure there's justification and plan showing that there's going to be a long useful life, and then stability and predictability in the sourcing of key supplies. And then moving to financial strength, $39 billion, $52 billion in an absolute sense is a ton of money. For me, and I'm sure for everyone on this call, it would be a life-changing sum. When you look at the semiconductor industry itself, however, and how much capital is expended on an annual basis, you realize that that 38.2 billion, as meaningful as it is, relative to the amount expended on an annual basis, it is not the large amount that we initially would have thought, right? Or that you would have thought. And so we have to be protective of these taxpayer funds. And so we have to ensure that these taxpayer dollars are not just replacing other private capital costs. We have to ensure that the projects we're investing in have the financial strength and ability to withstand stress and market downturn conditions. And so we deeply scrutinize this piece, and we owe it to the American taxpayers to get this right, not only to make the best use of their dollars, but because Chips for America has the ability to transform those taxpayers' communities into robust hubs of education and training and manufacturing and commerce. And then technical feasibility and readiness. And so, this metric focuses on Chips for America establishing nearly from scratch a semiconductor manufacturing R&D ecosystem in this country. And so with this priority, we need to address the feasibility of execution of the project from construction to ongoing operational execution and maintenance. And so it really comes down to organizational readiness, technology and manufacturing processes, construction plans, and then environmental risks. And if we can ensure that all these boxes are checked and that there are suitable plans in place, that shows us that there is a level of technical feasibility and readiness that meets our goals and our ambition when it comes to incenting projects with these taxpayer dollars. And then, workforce development is huge, as you all know. And this is not just specific to the semiconductor space, but really across industries. We have a very, very tight labor market. And so that stretches into the semiconductor space as well. And as our capacity grows with wafer production and these clusters and technology hubs across the country, we have to ensure that we have the workers in place too. Many independent organizations have talked about current labor shortages and upcoming labor shortages, both in construction and then also in the workforce that's in the actual facilities. We need to be aligned across academia, across two-year colleges, across apprenticeship programs and technical and vocational programs, and K-12 to ensure that we are building sufficient talent pipelines to meet the need, not just now, but in the future as well. And so we want to create good jobs. We want to recruit, hire, train, and retain a diverse and skilled construction and manufacturing workforce. We want to include women and economically disadvantaged individuals in this increased growth and developed ecosystem. And we want to engage with community partners, and also building childcare solutions, which is key. We are not the most efficient with our utilization of human capital. And I say that, women who left the workforce during the pandemic have not returned at the same rate that they left the workforce during the pandemic. And so why is that the case? One big reason is lack of suitable childcare. And so to ensure that we are utilizing the full capacity of our workforce, we must ensure that key factors such as childcare for families is in place. And you'll see more about that in our notice of funding opportunity and in a lot of the materials that we put out. And then broader impacts, the next slide. Chips for America is committed to building strong communities that participate in the prosperity of the semiconductor industry, as well as ensuring that taxpayer investments maximize benefits for the U.S. economy. In particular, we're interested in how projects will create broader impacts across the following dimensions. So, commitments to future investment in the U.S. semiconductor industry, support for semiconductor R&D, inclusive opportunities for businesses, climate and environmental responsibility, community investments, domestic content preferences, and then upside sharing. And so all of these pieces, which you can read more on our website, take us back to that goal of broader impacts to ensure that we're building strong communities that, from a long-term perspective, continue to benefit from this increased and developed semiconductor industry domestically. Going to the next slide, this is just a quick snapshot of what the application process actually looks like. And so, as you can see, the first step is a statement of interest. And so if you're dealing with potential applicants, interested parties who are thinking about application, developing consortia, et cetera, the first step is to submit that statement of interest. That gets you into the game, per se. And so once you have that statement of interest in, then that goes to our team that is managing the actual negotiating process and the application process, and you'll have someone at a certain point in that process assigned to you to help get you through the rest of the process. And so as you can see, there's an optional pre-application followed by full application and then due diligence. Once due diligence is completed, the award preparation. And then on the right side of the slide, you can see timelines for the different supply chain phases. So, larger supply chain projects, you can see the timeline for that. Leading edge, you can see the timeline for that. And then current, mature, and advanced packaging and back-end projects, you can see the timeline for those as well. And again, these are all on our website. Smaller and supply chain projects, we can actually, again, we're going to send these slides out. So in the interest of time, let's skip through these. But please do, if you have a chance to take a look at all of these slides, please do. They have really useful information that we've compiled, I hope in a beneficial and informative way. Again, this speaks to how we view some of the smaller supply chain projects, and I think it will be helpful, especially for this region. So please do take a look at that. We can skip directly to R&D. We'll spend a few minutes here. I think we'll get to maybe the the 10:45 Central Time, and then we will, I think, transition to questions. So as far as challenges that led us to that $11 billion investment in R&D. So, the same trends that shifted most of semiconductor manufacturing away from the US have exposed vulnerabilities in US research and development. The United States lacks the R&D infrastructure to support a robust manufacturing ecosystem. We have few domestic facilities to prototype, test, and prepare to mass produce new technologies, and competition for technical experts in the broader tech community is significant. There are few available candidates for chip manufacturing jobs, which we've talked about already. And to restate a point we often make, reshoring semiconductor manufacturing to the United States is about more than building fabs. We also need to address the entire sector, and that includes building a vibrant R&D ecosystem. And so the investments we make in R&D will make our domestic manufacturers more innovative and competitive, and there's going to be sustained leadership in the semiconductor industry that will drive innovation across the U.S. economy, strengthening every sector that relies on semiconductors. And as we know now, especially, every sector relies on semiconductors. And so that's including technologies like AI, quantum computing, and many other things, electric vehicles, et cetera, that will address society's biggest challenges. Let's go to the next slide. And so these are the main pieces of our R&D program. So the National Semiconductor Technology Center, which we view as the anchor and the focal point for the CHIPS R&D program, the National Advanced Packaging Manufacturing Program. And so we talked about advanced packaging. We have to skip U.S. capacity ahead to advanced packaging to regain and keep leadership in semiconductors. Like I said, trying to keep up with Moore's Law, trying to keep up with continued efficiencies, continued innovation with respect to semiconductors. And then Manufacturing USA Institutes. There are about 17 Manufacturing USA Institutes across the country currently. These advance research and commercialization of semiconductor manufacturing technologies. We want to create up to 3 new public-private partner institutes in the Manufacturing USA network focused on semiconductor manufacturing. And then last but not least, metrology research and development. So that's really the measurement science critical to the development of new materials and packaging. And so we'll develop reference materials and data and calibrations and advise on the development of standards for processes, cybersecurity, and test methods. A lot of what NIST, our home agency, does already and has existing capacity for, but we plan to increase that capacity with part of this funding. Next slide, I won't spend too much time on this, but again, this is really useful for you to look at when you get a chance. This shows a timeline of what we've done this year already on the R&D front, what we're focused on this summer, and what we plan to do in the fall and winter. So again, a useful slide for you to spend some time on when you get a chance. And then this is also a great slide. Like I said, the NSTC is the anchor of our CHIPS R&D programs. And so this gives you more of a look into what our vision looks like for the NSTC. We put out a letter to the community on the NSTC last November. That's also on the chips.gov website. Encourage you all to check that out when you get a chance. Over the last 6 to 8 months, we put out a lot of information on NSTC. People are very excited about this consortium. It's going to bring a lot of different pieces of the ecosystem together. Manufacturers, entrepreneurs, fabless firms and customers and end users, academia, workforce representatives. It's going to be unlike anything, obviously, we've seen in this country. And so we're very excited to continue to put out more information about this program, which you can find on the website. And then skipping, we can skip the next 2 slides, which are kind of what I just touched on. Let's see. Actually, I think we're good. So the rest of the deck dives into the different NSTC, into the different R&D programs, including the NSTC, the National Advanced Packaging Manufacturing Program, the Manufacturing USA institutes, up to 3 of them new, and then the metrology R&D program. So please do, at your availability, take a look at all those slides. It does have critical information as far as what our R&D plans are coming down the pike, which you can find more at chips.gov. So as you can tell, I tried to get through a lot of that information rather quickly. So I'm sorry if it seemed like I was rushing. I just didn't want to miss any key pieces, but happy to hand the mic back to Preet, and available for any questions that y'all might have.
Thank you. I really appreciate all that information. And for everyone that's attending, we will send a copy of the deck as well as a recording of this presentation to you all. So we do have a few questions. Do you know the timeline for when the CHIPS guardrails final rules will come out?
Great question. I know we are working on that. I don't think we have an update ready yet for public consumption, but we should have something relatively soon. And relatively soon in other parts of the government can sometimes mean months, if not years. Relatively soon here sometimes means days, weeks, in the next month. And so let's stay in touch on that, but I anticipate we should have an update on the national security guardrails rather soon.
Thank you. What can you tell us about the upcoming NOFO for the research infrastructure that was mentioned in slide 3?
Mm-hmm. And so we, like I said, it's separate from the $11 billion R&D program. That funding opportunity is going to come out of the $39 billion manufacturing incentives fund. And so in our engagement and outreach with industry, we have identified a challenge or an opportunity, depending on how you view it, as companies invest in these fabrication facilities. There is a need to have R&D capacity in very close proximity to these new investments. Like I said, in the time that it takes for these facilities to be built and to come online, it's an imperative that once the building, sorry, I heard a lot of noise in the background, I think a door shut. Once these facilities come online, that the equipment that is being utilized for whatever the output is going to be, that the iterative process to get that up-to-date equipment is ongoing. And so a lot of companies are making investments in either R&D components or R&D or separate R&D facilities. And we want to open up an opportunity to assist in the incenting process as far as making those investments, so that these critical projects do have a long, useful life as far as wafer production or whatever output they have across the supply chain. So I hope that answers the question. And we're looking forward to putting out that R&D funding opportunity in the next couple of months.
Okay. We've got quite a few questions, and just for everyone that's attending, if we don't get to your questions, I will email them to Adele and email back to the attendees answers to those questions. I just, wanted to ask you, one of the reasons I reached out to you to make this presentation is, do you have a chart that's pretty straightforward and simple that says, here are the funding opportunities, here are kind of the timelines, here's who's eligible, just something that's like a, quick one-page overview? I think there's so much happening, not just with NIST, but with, with the federal government, with the infrastructure bill. One of the things that's been helpful to our region is just to have a quick snapshot. And so if you have anything like that, you can send us. I can forward that on to folks.
Yeah, our team is happy to get that over to you pretty shortly. I know we have that information sometimes in many different places, right, and so it's useful to have it in one place, and we're happy to provide that.
Yeah, we would be really grateful to have that. Is there a location where there's a list online or elsewhere of eligible semiconductor companies? Obviously, sometimes the private sector doesn't know to look to government for assistance, so it may be, local government or someone else that needs to reach out to a local company. So is there a list somewhere?
Yeah, so if you go to the chips.gov website, you'll find a link, and Preet, I can send this to you afterwards too, to disperse to everyone. we have something that we put out recently called the Teaming Partner List. I think we put this out at the end of June.
Okay.
We are in a position where, like I said, we've been doing engagement with a lot of stakeholders for the last year plus, industry and otherwise. And we've received a lot of information that has informed our program design. And I think we have a lot of good information too that we wish we could put out in a really strategic way, but at the same time, we don't want to be in a position of matchmaking because that would counter the competitive nature of this program. And so one of the ways we've tried to navigate that is by building out this teaming partner list function. And so we've put out a form that external stakeholders can sign up at based on their own prerogative. And then we basically just put that entire list out there. I think there's different filters for the information in there as far as industry type, location, et cetera. And so if you are a locality in North Central Texas and you're wondering if there are any potential industry partners or stakeholders or otherwise, in the region, you can, navigate that forum and see what's out there. And hopefully that can help foster some of these strategic partnerships, which we know are so critical to this ecosystem. And then also importantly, we hope that you would complete the form as well, so that, I've had companies reach out to me asking, are there localities that are looking for this kind of project? And I'm like, I can't really tell you that, but maybe you want to check out the teaming partner list and see what's out there. So I encourage you all to use it, to spread it and share it far and wide. And reach out to us if you have any additional questions specific to that.
Okay. If you don't mind sharing the links to some of the resources you're mentioning, we would be grateful. I can forward those on, and you can send them to me afterwards, and I will get them to folks. But if someone wants you to make a presentation to a different group, how might they do that? I know I filled out a form on the NIST website making the request, but is there another avenue?
Yes. So, in our capacity as the Intergovernmental Affairs team here at CHIPS, we're responsible for leading on outreach and engagement with states and localities all across the country. And so, we have a great team here. Some of them might actually be on this call today, but I'm going to drop my email in the chat. And so don't ever hesitate to reach out to me directly, and we will we'll get your request process, whether it's a question, an invitation to do a briefing with a preferred group. We're always happy to facilitate those.
Okay. And are you considering separate funding opportunities for the workforce development programs that you mentioned?
So on the manufacturing incentive side, we require that every potential applicant does have a workforce development plan or strategy included in their application. And so there's not necessarily a way to direct funding through our grant program for those workforce strategies. But depending on the proposal of the project, I think there's flexibility as far as what the funds can be used for when it comes to dispersed funds that are being leveraged for each individual project. When it comes to the R&D program, the $11 billion CHIPS R&D office, there may be different kind of grant programs associated with workforce. I mentioned the National Science Foundation. They've played a leadership role on helping convene those sort of workforce focused consortia, and so we're definitely leveraging that template and model as folks build out the R&D office on our side. And so it's not to promise that there will be specific grants for use in workforce efforts, but it's something that I've seen pop up in discussions and conversations, and so there'll be more information coming on that side. But workforce is a key priority. It's a key challenge, as you all know, and we want to make sure that the projects we're investing in, the efforts we're investing in, do have robust workforce plans in place.
Okay, thank you. So there's a couple of questions on deadlines because some of the dates have already obviously passed, and then are local governments eligible or do they need to be part of a consortium? So I think that goes back to if we could get some sort of a just a synopsis overview of here, all the NOFOs released or expected, some deadlines, eligibility, that sort of thing. It'll help people kind of get a grasp of what you're offering, for,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I will say, I've been in the CHIPS office for a year, and it does feel like dog years in here. It feels like I've been here 7 years. That's just because of like the scale of information that we're processing and putting out there. This conversation is about a year after enactment. You all are still very much early in the game. So the first NOFO in February for the commercial scale leading edge and current generation and back end projects. So that application window has already opened up, but we have not reached any deadlines. There are actually no deadlines for any of these these funding opportunities. Everything is on a rolling basis, and honestly, some people on the outside might, depending on where they are in the supply chain, might want us to move quicker. Some might want us to move slower. But what I can say is that, we've staffed up from 0 to about 140 people. We have a large team working on the applications and on the deals. We haven't approved one application yet. We haven't sent out $1 yet. Everything is still kind of in process, and we've received, I think, 460 something statements of interest, which is quite a bit. But we continue to receive those, and so, like I said, you very much have not missed the boat. It's still very early days. Everything is on a rolling basis. There are no deadlines for any of this funding, and so encourage you all, if you're aware of potential applicants, industry partners, to have that statement of interest submitted. And to get in touch with us about any questions that you have so that we can help you along.
And is there guidance on what you're looking for in the statement of interest?
Yeah, so happy to send a link that provides more information on that piece as well. But there's a separate portal for applications, and so it's a pretty intuitive process to walk you through that to ensure that that you have what you need for that SOI submission, and then the additional pieces as well.
Okay. And there was a follow-up question on the research infrastructure component. Is that intended for industrial research?
Industrial research, well, it's intended for research specific to the industrial project that it's associated with. And so, again, depending on, we talked about what's eligible now, what's going to be eligible in the future. Across the supply chain, there is a need for that iterative R&D process associated with the output at specific facilities. So it's going to be tied to that piece. And so I would say, if you are aware of a cluster, and there are many clusters in Texas, think about it from that standpoint as far as building out these potential clusters and sort of what the technical need is specific to these clusters.
Yeah, as you mentioned, and I mentioned at the front end, is obviously we have a strong and a large semiconductor industry between the Oklahoma border and our region, North Central Texas, and a lot of industry and research does sit here. And so there's quite a bit of interest. So it is good to know that no one has passed any deadlines. I think, we're used to working with EDA where there's some strict deadlines, and that's the information share. So I appreciate you sharing that. I don't see any other questions that we haven't covered. Is there anything else you want to highlight or just kind of remind folks of?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I see a comment about the timeline to train a workforce and things like that. Yeah. Those are things we literally talk about every single day. So it's top of mind for us as well. We have a public engagement team that works directly with academia, with two-year colleges. One of the folks who joined this office to work on the workforce policy side, has spent a career working with community colleges to understand how that ecosystem works and to figure out how we can leverage that ecosystem to really benefit from this industry boon. And so we're working on a daily basis internally and with our external partners and stakeholders to ensure like that there is that alignment I mentioned in Texas, but also across the country. Because again, there are shortages now, there's shortages in the future, whether it's construction or in the fab. And so we're working diligently to do our piece to try to address those challenges. And then, you know, local governments, whether it's state or local, like I said, it's explicit in the statute. Incentive from a local state government is required. And so they have to be part of this process. As far as, you know, being the, you know, covered entity that is the applicant, it really depends on sort of the iterative process as we define what that consortium is. And so I would, if I were in your shoes, as far as a local government asking that question, I would figure out who the partners are, both industry, academia, workforce, etc. What that proposal is going to look like. And then you don't have to worry about necessarily answering that consortium question prior to starting the process. We have a ever-growing team that's going to help work with you during that back and forth. And so don't worry about, you mentioned, you know, some of the application processes at some of our sister agencies where it's like, you know, submit that application, we'll get an answer in about 2-3 weeks. This is not that kind of grant program. This is something we want to be quick with, but we want to be extremely judicious, and we want to ensure that we're working with you all to identify you know, proposals and projects that really do meet those overarching goals of economic security, national security, and continued innovation leadership. And so, long story short, it's very iterative. It's a rolling process. First step is kicking out that SOI. If for some reason there's an issue with any specific entity kicking off the SOI, we'll work with you to identify who should be the point, at least starting off, and then we can work through any issues moving forward.
Okay, and I do see a question. Will there be opportunities for university research?
Yeah, so I anticipate more information coming on the R&D side. So I think just to get a high level overview as far as you know, our roadmap, would definitely invite you to go to chips.gov and to look at some of the NSTC materials that was put out already, which I'm happy to bump after this call. But there's going to be a lot more coming in the next couple of months before the end of the year, honestly, on the NSTC, and it's going to speak specifically to the academia piece.
Okay, that sounds great. As far as the consortium, I know some agencies require different geographic scopes. And so do you have any just general guidance on what you might be looking for, or is that wide open?
It's wide open. I think, and did you just ask about consortia or clusters?
Consortia. Well, actually to both. Are you looking for any sort of geographic scope?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty wide open to both. And
Okay.
so I think if there is the chip production aspect, if there is a strong workforce and academia piece, state or local government involvement, of course, is key and required. And then existing, you know, supply chain footprint or ability to attract, you know, key supply chain entities. I think these are all pieces of what we consider, you know, like a emerging or robust cluster. And so there's no geographic requirement to that. You know, what I just described really does exist all over the country, and especially all over Texas. And so, yeah, there's no geographic requirement that we've put out there. It's more so ensuring that all those different pieces are available and do sort of meet, again, those overarching goals.
Well, I don't see any additional questions here, so thank you so much for responding to our request for this presentation. As I said on the onset of this webinar, we know that these funding opportunities have great economic resiliency, economic development, workforce benefits, and so and EDA is a sister agency to you all under the Department of Commerce. So though we don't have the expertise, we're grateful that you were here today to provide some background and some links and some information that I know are going to be beneficial to the attendees and to our regional partners. So I look forward to getting some of those links, and to all the attendees, thank you all for being here. We will share a copy of the slide deck, this recording, and then any links that we receive from the CHIPS office with you all. So thank you so much, Adele. I really, really appreciate it. So we look forward to staying in touch and maybe hosting some future webinars as things develop.
Absolutely. We look forward to that. Preet, thank you again for having us. And we look forward to continued engagement with you and everyone else who joined today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great week. Thank you.